FM News Talk 97.1.
On-demand audio.
As we do every Monday, we always talk to Stephen Yates, who is a foreign policy expert with the D.C. International Advisory, DCIadvisory.org. Stephen, happy Monday to you, sir.
Hi, Dana. Good to be back.
Good to speak with you. These some very troubling reports coming from Jennifer Griffin via Fox News. This story that apparently the president rejected 3 different plans to recover or destroy this drone that has been reportedly intercepted over Iranian territory. What do you know about this story? Is any of this true? Because I know that there was a lot of discussion originally as to whether or not they even had actually captured this drone.
Right. Well, there's very little information beyond what Jennifer is able to let us know by way of her reporting. She has outstanding sources, and I tend to trust the accuracy of what she's putting out. There's a lot of reasons why you might be hesitant about going after a drone. I mean, if they have it in their territory, going in and taking it means you need to violate their sovereign territory, which, given just cause, we should do. But the Obama administration hasn't really made clear at all where it intends to go with its relations with Iran, period, where it's going on the nuclear front, where it's going on the political front. I just think they have no context in which to decide how important is it to go in and take something from Iran that's rightfully ours.
Right, exactly. Well, I'm wondering if how much do you think that they would be able to actually glean from this drone?
I have my doubts about what foreign power can do by sort of deconstructing and re-engineering a device that they capture. But certainly far, far better for our security not to lose control over these kinds of things. And there's not the modest consideration of the taxpayers having paid a considerable amount of money for Obama to have what essentially is a video game like War on Terror. And it sort of ignores there's less human cost, but there's still a lot of cost if they can compromise this technology.
Right, exactly. Well, we know that it's been a boon for the Iranian propaganda machine because they've had those images splashed all over their government television, like they've really scored a big coup over the United States, but they were able to get this drone. And so, of course, that doesn't bode well as well when you are fighting this, when you're in the battle of ideas in this public sphere and you're, trying to battle propaganda with propaganda.
I think it's absolutely true, and it's a very, very important point. I mean, most Americans only think of war in the kinetic sense of force against force, but there's a political war that's always ongoing, and if there's no counter-programming to what the enemy is trying to sell its public and others, then they win. And the Obama administration has had no programming to the Muslim world outside of the president's Cairo speech that was sort of apologizing for George W. Bush and his warm and cozy relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood. Beyond that, there's no counter-programming to say what we stand for, what's right or wrong, and what's going on in their own countries.
Right. More protests continuing in Egypt after the Morsi concession there. This is, again, still ongoing. Could we see Morsi step down?
I think it's possible, but unlikely. I mean, he is really, in a very ironic way, facing the same pressure that was aimed at Mubarak. There's really a lot of energy in these protests. They're sustaining their movement, and they have a lot of justification for the protest. He seems to be very skillfully negotiating with outside powers to blunt the pressure aimed at him. I mean, one thing he did was to use the Gaza deal as a way to brush back the United States, and we've had no real statements from the administration putting pressure on him. And he's got relations with others in the region that he's using to his advantage. So he seems to recognize he bit off more than he should have. He's trying to concede back some of his power grab, but he still plans to go forward with this referendum. And a rushed Islamist constitution is just not good for Egyptians or us.
Right. No, I completely agree. Definitely not good as well. Well, this moving from Egypt to Syria, I know you and I talked a little bit about this last week, the idea that they have chemical weapons, which, in most likelihoods they probably do. They released a video via the Syria Tribune showing them doing these experiments with chemical weaponry on rabbits. And it was sort of kind of a warning, saying, like, you see what happened here. This is the same thing that could happen to you. I realize that this is going to ascend to something. Something will have to be done at some point, especially if they start to use these weapons on their own citizens. But just because something must be done, does it mean that the United States should do it? Because I just feel like it's kind of I feel like Admiral Akbar. I'm like, it's a trap. It's a trap. I mean, I'm being overly cautious and maybe a little paranoid, but shouldn't this be something that the Arab League takes care of?
There's no question that something must be done, and I think you're absolutely right. It should not fall to us and us alone, and it should not fall to us to act first. We need not be the ones taking all the risk, given that others face more grave risk since they're bordering states. And Turkey, I think, faces the most serious threat out of Syria. And when it comes to these chemical weapons, use on the Syrian people would be tragic, and it would be horrible. And those videos, I'm sure, are very disgusting, and the reality of the use is even worse when it's on humans. But the proliferation risk is profound. I think there's basically two things going on here. It's possible that Assad has a clever strategy where he's trying to amp up focus on these chemical weapons. He can negotiate those away in exchange for people agreeing to have him stay in power. So he could work with the Russians to say, hey, see, we put a lid on this problem, and now because of his good behavior, back off on this civil war and political struggle. I think that's an enormous mistake, and will just leave us with tragedy later. But the other thing could be happening is that he does plan to use these. And it's awful. We have to watch out for spillover to a broader regional conflict. Unfortunately, though, 40,000 people have already died in Syria. This would amp those numbers up in an instant. But it doesn't really tell us which way the civil war would go after something like that.
Yeah, and that's the concern, because it doesn't seem to be the smoothest of transitions, and it seems more often than not in every single one of these countries where you have a turnover like this, it's always some sort of faction that vows to implement either Sharia as a whole or some form of it in their constitutions. So that's, it becomes very concerning.
Definitely the number one story out of Arab Spring so far is that the West has been slow to come to sort of support the ouster of leaders, but has been worse in winning the peace to follow. And in all of these exchanges for dictatorships, we've ended up with Islamists with greater power and potentially enduring Islamist dictatorships using democracy as a ruse to take power.
Right. To change it up a little bit, this piece from Politico, which is making the rounds, a report out from the intel community, which says that the United States by 2013 is out as the singular superpower in the world. And of course, they mention China. They go over GDP, population size, spending on defense, technology. They're saying, especially looking at China, that Asia could surpass North America and Europe combined. And I know that there's a lot of my friends out there that are looking at this from a purely economic standpoint, but I see some very big foreign policy implications as a result of this order, as predicted by the intel community. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I am as concerned as anybody about the decline of American power, and I think it's mostly a choice we've made on our own. It's not something that's imposed upon us. I have grave misgivings about academics masquerading as intelligence officers publishing assessments from what most people think is a National Intelligence Council, but it's basically a paid-for vacation for academics to pretend like they're with the big boys playing with intelligence. These forecasts are not worth the paper they're written on. And if we are determined to follow the Obama lead and get behind, then of course these new realities will present themselves. But China faces challenges as it moves forward. Asia is not a monolith. The Middle East is not a monolith. And America, if properly led or sufficiently provoked, remains the only power for good with the capability to reshape the world. It's really a question of priorities, motivation, and really getting things in good order at home. That's on us. We don't need to fear the others. But if we want to put our heads in the sand and drive backwards, like everyone voted for this last cycle, yeah, we could get there, and it's an unpleasant world.
So we shouldn't really put too much stock in this because they don't, and it's Politico, so you can kind of take it for what it's worth. But they didn't identify. They just say that, that's this Global Trends 2030 Alternative Worlds, the National Intelligence Council. And it does, this is not, it just seems like a headline to push a certain narrative.
It definitely is. And it's not necessarily Politico's fault, except the left-leaning professors in the National Intelligence Council know where to go in the media to find a friendly outlet.
Right.
But the National Intelligence Council, to most Americans, is going to sound like it's part of the intelligence community. And that's where those people reside. These are not operators. These are not long-time analysts. Their input goes in there, but essentially these people write a narrative they choose. And, of course, if they can't tell who the winners and losers, the Islamists or non-Islamists are in the conflicts we have today, why would we trust they can forecast where the world is going 10 years from now?
Amen to that. That's a great point. Stephen Yates, D.C. International Advisory. Always a pleasure. My friend, thank you so much for your expertise on this, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you, Dave. Anytime.
Take care.